Tonight, the question that every emergency session in Washington, every classified debrief at CENTCOM, and every conversation between allied intelligence services has been circling around since the first Iranian missile found its target in the Strait of Hormuz, but that no official spokesperson, no network anchor, and no government statement has yet been willing to state plainly, gets answered on this channel. Because the answer is too inconvenient for the institutions that built the policy it indicts. The Fate 313 that obliterated American tankers, the Khaybar Shekan that shattered OPEC's foundational security premise, the Sayyad 4 that reached inside the most expensive stealth aircraft program in human history and pulled F-35s out of the sky, the Shahad 136 swarm that turned Iron Dome's mathematics against it. These are not Iranian weapons. Not in the sense that matters strategically. They are Chinese weapons, built from Chinese components, guided by Chinese navigation architecture, refined by Chinese signal processing expertise, transferred through channels that a decade of American sanctions policy was explicitly designed to close, and that a decade of American intelligence assessment consistently, catastrophically, institutionally chose to underestimate. The hidden hand behind every weapon system that has humiliated American deterrence in the Middle East in the past 18 months belongs to Beijing. And Washington knew, not suspected, not assessed with moderate confidence, knew, with the kind of documentary precision that classified intelligence products generate and that official public statements are crafted specifically to conceal. Tonight, this channel delivers the complete strategic architecture of what China actually transferred to Iran, how it was transferred, what it enabled, and what it means for every American military guarantee extended to every ally on the planet.
To understand what China transferred to Iran and why the transfer succeeded in the face of the most comprehensive sanctions regime ever constructed by American financial and legal power, you must first understand that you are not looking at a series of individual procurement decisions. You are looking at a deliberate, patient, strategically coherent program of capability transfer that Beijing designed from the outset to be unattributable, deniable, and irreversible, and that it is executed across 15 years with the same institutional discipline it applies to its own military modernization. The transfer did not move through official state-to-state arms agreements. It moved through the layered architecture of Chinese state-adjacent commercial entities, research partnerships between Iranian and Chinese universities, third-country procurement networks operating through UAE free trade zones and Turkish commercial intermediaries, and direct technical personnel exchanges that were documented in Iranian engineering journals in language that American open-source intelligence collection consistently failed to adequately weight. The first layer is component supply. Chinese dual-use electronics, processors, guidance accelerometers, signal processing chips, radar component assemblies flowed into Iranian defense manufacturing through commercial channels that sanctions enforcement was structurally unable to fully interdict. The manufacturers were not Chinese state defense enterprises whose exports trigger automatic sanctions scrutiny. They were the vast ecosystem of Chinese commercial electronics firms whose products are indistinguishable from civilian industrial components at the point of sale, and whose Iranian customers were intermediated through enough commercial layers to provide the legal insulation that international sanctions compliance frameworks require before enforcement action becomes viable.
The Khaybar Shekan's terminal guidance seeker, the specific component whose active radar homing capability defeated Saudi Patriot batteries with 400 simultaneous maneuvering warheads, incorporates signal processing architecture whose design lineage traces directly to Chinese millimeter-wave radar development programs. Iranian engineers did not derive this from first principles under sanctions isolation. They received it. The documentation of that receipt exists in the signals intelligence databases of multiple Western intelligence services. It has never appeared in a public sanctions designation. The second layer is expertise transfer. Chinese technical personnel operating under academic exchange and commercial research partnership frameworks have been present in Iranian defense-adjacent research facilities continuously across the period during which the Sayyad 4, the Khaybar Shekan, and the advanced Shahed variants moved from developmental to operational status. These individuals were not uniformed People's Liberation Army officers. They were researchers affiliated with Chinese universities that maintained formal classified research relationships with PLA defense programs. Their presence in Iranian facilities was documented. Its significance was consistently underweighted in the institutional calculus that determined what American policymakers would be told and what they would be permitted to act upon. The third layer, and the most strategically consequential, is the GPS-independent navigation architecture that now underlies the guidance systems of every Iranian weapon that has demonstrated the ability to defeat American electronic warfare countermeasures. This did not come from Russian technical cooperation, though Russian expertise contributed to related programs. It came from Chinese Beidou satellite navigation system integration work that gave Iranian weapons designers access to a positioning infrastructure entirely outside American GPS architecture, immune to the spoofing, jamming, and signal denial that American electronic warfare doctrine assumed would degrade Iranian precision strike capability in a contested electromagnetic environment. When Iranian missiles found their targets in the Strait of Hormuz, despite American electronic warfare systems operating at full capability, it was not because Iranian engineers had independently solved the GPS denial problem. It was because they had been given a solution whose architecture Washington had spent years insisting Iran could not access.
The specific intelligence failure that allowed 12 Israeli F-35s to fly into an engagement envelope built around a missile system that Western threat assessment insisted was beyond Iranian indigenous capability has a name that classified post-engagement reviews are now documenting in language that will not reach the public for years. The name is the Beidou Terminal Navigation Integration Program, and it is the reason that the Sayyad 4 does not need GPS to find its target, a design choice whose origin Western analysis attributed to Iranian indigenous engineering, and whose actual provenance is a 5-year technical cooperation program between Iranian air defense research institutions and Chinese aerospace defense contractors, whose civilian cover identities are a matter of open record in Chinese commercial registry documents. The active radar seeker that makes the Sayyad 4 genuinely dangerous against fifth-generation stealth aircraft, the terminal guidance capability that defeats the F-35's radar cross-section advantage by shifting the illumination radar from ground-based fire control to the missile itself, is not a technology that Iranian engineers derived from first principles. It is a technology whose fundamental design architecture was transferred through the academic and commercial channels that Beijing's transfer program uses precisely because they fall beneath the legal threshold that American sanctions enforcement requires before designation actions can be taken. Iranian engineers are brilliant. Their contributions to the programs that produce these weapons are genuine and substantial. But the specific technical bottlenecks that would have taken a decade of isolated indigenous development to solve were solved in years because Chinese partners provided the solutions. Washington's intelligence community knew this. The Defense Intelligence Agency's classified assessments of Chinese technical transfer to Iranian missile programs contain the documentary basis for a sanctions enforcement campaign that was never launched with the scope or speed that the intelligence warranted. Confronting China directly over Iranian arms transfers requires the American political system to choose between its Iran policy and its China policy at a moment when both are simultaneously under maximum stress. The administration that brands itself as the hardest line against Chinese strategic competition cannot simultaneously acknowledge that its maximum pressure Iran policy failed because China systematically undermined it. Because that acknowledgement requires admitting that maximum pressure failed not because of Iranian resilience alone, but because Beijing made a strategic decision to ensure it failed, and executed that decision successfully across a decade of patient, disciplined, deniable transfer. That truth is politically unbearable. So Washington is silent, and the weapons built with Chinese components keep finding their targets.
Accept the strategic reality that China has successfully used Iran as a platform for degrading American military technology credibility in a theater where direct Sino-American confrontation would be prohibitively costly, and restructure American strategic planning to operate in an environment where the assumption of technological superiority against Iranian systems is no longer operationally valid. Option 3 is the honest option. It is also the institutionally impossible one for a defense establishment whose procurement culture, allied commitment architecture, and congressional authorization framework all rest on the premise that American military technology remains decisively superior to any combination of adversary systems a regional actor can field. None of these options is adequate. The administration's communications since the operational demonstrations began have reflected this inadequacy, with the particular incoherence that emerges when an institution must simultaneously maintain two contradictory positions. China is our principal strategic competitor, and Iranian weapons that China built are the product of Iranian indigenous genius, in the same press conference cycle. The Chinese decision to systematically arm Iran across 15 years of American sanctions pressure was not a reactive or opportunistic decision. It was a strategic calculation made at the highest levels of Chinese Communist Party decision-making and executed with the institutional discipline that China's civil-military fusion framework is specifically designed to provide. The calculation rested on four interlocking assessments that Chinese strategic planners made correctly, while American strategic planners were making the opposite assumptions. First, a strategically capable Iran that could impose costs on American military operations in the Middle East would consume American strategic attention, military resources, and diplomatic capital in a theater where Chinese core interests are not directly at stake, reducing the bandwidth available for American strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific, where Chinese core interests are maximally engaged. Second, every operational demonstration of American military technology failure against Iranian systems built with Chinese components generates real-world data on the effectiveness of the capabilities China itself is developing for potential conflict scenarios in its own theater. The F-35's performance against the Syed-4 is data that Chinese air defense planners and Chinese Air Force commanders are analyzing with the professional attention that their own operational planning requires. Iran is China's live-fire laboratory for testing the capabilities designed to contest American air power in the Pacific. Third, the degradation of American deterrence credibility in the Middle East accelerates the reorientation of Gulf state security relationships toward frameworks that accommodate Chinese economic and diplomatic interests. The conversations between Riyadh and Beijing that have been proceeding with accelerating urgency since every Iranian operational demonstration are conversations that advance the petro-yuan settlement architecture and the alternative reserve currency frameworks that Chinese financial strategy has been working to institutionalize for years. Fourth, the transfer program, if executed with sufficient deniability, costs China nothing in direct confrontation with American power, while delivering strategic benefits across every feeder of Sino-American competition simultaneously. All four calculations have been validated by every operational development since the transfer program reached the maturity that allowed Iranian weapons to begin demonstrating the capabilities Chinese components made possible. China did not fire a single shot. It did not deploy a single soldier. It did not conduct a single act that American legal frameworks could unambiguously characterize as an act of war or even of hostile state action at the threshold that triggers formal American response. It simply ensured that when Iran fired its weapons, those weapons worked. And the world order that American military dominance was supposed to guarantee absorbed the consequences.
Pull back from the operational details, from the transfer channels and the component specifications and the guidance architecture lineages, and look at what the revelation of China's hidden role in arming the weapons that have humiliated American deterrence means for the architecture of global order. Because the consequences extend far beyond the bilateral strategic competition between Washington and Beijing. They reach into the foundational assumption that every American ally, every nation whose security is organized around American military guarantees, has been operating under since the end of the Cold War. That assumption is that American military technology superiority is a product of American innovation, American investment, and American strategic culture, and that it can be sustained through the American-led international order's ability to deny adversaries access to the technical foundations required to challenge it. China's transfer program has demonstrated that this assumption is false, that the international order's capacity to deny technical access to determined adversaries with the industrial scale, the financial resources, and the institutional patience to build denial evasion architecture is limited in ways that the assumption never honestly accounted for. Every allied capital that has organized its defense planning around American military technology guarantees is processing this revelation. Tokyo, Seoul, Warsaw, Canberra. Every government whose security depends on the premise that American systems will perform as advertised against the threats those governments realistically face is asking the same question in its classified planning sessions that no allied defense minister is yet prepared to ask in public. If China can use Iran as a platform to degrade the operational credibility of American military technology in a theater where American forces are physically present and fully committed, what does that imply for the credibility of American military technology in theaters where Chinese forces themselves are the adversary?